Weekly Download, a podcast about interesting games, industry news.
Brought to you by Big Games Machine.
Papaya's got some good marketing recently through Formula One with McLaren, so they're doing all right. But for me, I think it's Pokemon because they have so many berries that are based on fruit and veg with funny names to not be sued by the real thing. Then you can get some quite obscure ones in there. So that's the segue. Yeah. But you need a 5 a day. Apparently, we can do 1 a week of podcasts for our beloved listeners.
Hit you with 5 headlines.
Yeah, there we go. All the numbers. The numbers being what I am back in the saddle, joined again by Alex, who you made your debut wrestling style last week. Now you're getting the mega push.
Yeah, I came in, pulled you out, and now you've kind of come and tagged out Tom. So it's a whole.
It's a.
I'm about to mix metaphors. I was going to say a full court press. That's not wrestling. That bodes well.
Well, if you are new to the show, my name is Jack. I'm joined by Alex, and you would normally have our co-host Tom. We are a bunch of PR professionals, games industry veterans, people who have opinions. I know Alex certainly does about some of the stories here today. But really, our job is to go behind the headlines and just make the news easier to digest for you. Again, like some healthy fruit. So we've got a fair few things to bite into today. So without any further ado, shall we jump in, Alex?
Yeah. What's the first story this week? So we pull a lot of this from the newsletter we put out daily, and there's a weekly roundup. And to my eternal shame, I'm very busy, so I don't get a chance to look at the news. And because I was away at some events this week, I haven't even had a chance to check up on our daily downloads.
Well, that
Hit
is
me with what this is.
That is a great
excuse. Be new to me.
That is a great excuse for me to run through what we are covering today. This week's headlines include the console wars, the AI debate, PR risks, and in the rundown, we are going to cover the Grammys, sequels, and the potential game of the year. So there's a lot to cover today because we're going to be covering quite a few stories within stories. Much like the fruit and veg metaphor, shout out Shrek, there's a lot of layers here today. That is our news onion. So our first major story encompasses the console wars. The PS5 sales milestone was announced this week, and also hot off the press, not the full court press though, is the Steam machine being announced, which generally means there's been some massive moves in the console market this week. The newest and biggest of those, arguably, is the Steam machine, which Valve have announced to offer another route into the PC/console hybrid market. Now, it looks like a GameCube, some people have said, and it reminds them of that. And it's not a new concept. They have tried the Steam machine before, back in 2015.
I felt like it was earlier than that, but yeah, I'm sure you're right.
I have fact-checked, and it was considered a failure at the time. To be honest, I'd forgotten they had tried it.
No, I remember at the time I was a journalist, and they had some Steam machines in for the game reviews kind of team that they had there. But they were very much PCs light, or even actually just gaming PCs, so they were still running Windows and things like that. So I think the Steam Deck was kind of a good backdoor for them to get that platform up and running, that interface up and running, and kind of really dodge one of the costs of having a gaming PC, which, essentially an element you barely touch if all you're using it for is gaming. The other thing, of course, was at that point, it was really still a PC, so you still on a desk with a mouse, whereas this is set up to act far more like a console.
Yeah, we don't yet have a price point. There's still very limited information there, but you're completely right saying about the Steam Deck. This is a signal that they are going to sustain their interest in hardware. The Steam Deck for them was a success, they feel. They feel now they can continue going down that route, pivoting, not just being a digital storefront, but now actually getting involved in the console market, which is where we can return to the other players in the console market, because there are lots of reports that Xbox is also looking to do a hybrid PC/games console. We've talked about Xbox a lot on the shows so far. If our long-time listeners have listened to everything, they're probably sick of us talking about Xbox, but Xbox
I haven't. It's all new to me, so bring it on.
Well, this is a question you need to raise with the Xbox marketing department then, because they have been pushing this. This is an Xbox sales marketing advertising campaign for a while now trying to make people understand that anything could be an Xbox, and clearly that's something they have in mind for whatever this new Xbox looks like.
I mean, if that's the path they're going down, and their Xbox is just going to be another way of getting in as Game Pass as kind of like a service offering that can be played on anything, maybe they're just not going to care that the Xbox is going to kind of peter out as a hardware platform. I was going to say as a platform, absolutely not what I meant, because platforms are now software. It's not like when Sega dipped out of the market and kind of like, okay, well, that means Sega's going to be producing games for everybody and elements like that. They're still going to own the kind of distribution of it within their thing, within whatever platform they're on. And I imagine they will have, let's say, for example, that they do come up with some form of Game Pass that will then stream through to, let's swing for the stars, PlayStation. I imagine, however they get there, they'll come up with very favourable terms to have the storefront up and probably still take the lion's share of whatever money is exchanged there. At least that's what I'd imagine. They have the weight behind them to do that. So I think it's just a case of what platforms are now. Although, going back to the idea of console wars, I doubt that's going to be much condolence to people who've bought an Xbox and view it as a singular thing at this point. But maybe that, as you say, that's what their marketing efforts are trying to disperse as a concept.
Because we had the news this week that the PlayStation 5 had reached a new sales milestone of over 80 million sold, I believe was the number mooted there. And within that same batch of news, Sony announced there would be a Japan exclusive PlayStation 5, which is something that Nintendo have seen success with a Switch 2, available only in Japan. And this is to reduce scalping, reselling abroad. It's not a new thing, but import tax.
And don't think all this is a great idea, because my understanding is they're both region locked and language locked. So
yes.
even were you to go and live in Japan, you wouldn't have the option to switch things to English or play in English. Some games may, but yes, on a hardware level, you would be locked out.
And it's an interesting one because Japan had a exclusive PlayStation 2, and there wasn't such a thing for the PS3 or 4. And now we are back in this generation.
When you say exclusive, do you mean region locked? Or 3 was still technically region locked, but yeah, since PS4, it's all been done away with. I say some games, specifically Persona Versus, and I can't think of the other one because my PlayStation 3 was Japanese, so this was a uniquely troubling thing for me. The handful of games that wouldn't work. But yes, it was an opt-in, opt-out, but most people opt out of region locking on from PS3 onwards. You're absolutely right. I will say that the kind of declaration that it's the biggest PlayStation, that PlayStation's like won the war, is completely discounting Nintendo because Switch has done better. So it's kind
this is it, right?
There.
It's people's perception of what a console is, because Nintendo have absolutely a monopoly on the handheld market, which again makes it interesting that Valve wants part of that with the Steam Deck. At the same time, we've again been talking for weeks now about Xbox scaling back, about Xbox putting their games on the PlayStation now, because seemingly they are giving up on this Xbox generation as a brand and moving on to something else. There's not really any form of competitor for the PS5 as the just stereotypical, you might get a console for Christmas, you plug it in for the TV, the whole family plays something on it. Because the Switch, and I say this as someone who always has a soft spot for handheld. Handhelds are always kind of put in their own box, even though the Switch was designed to not be purely handheld.
I feel like the console as we are defining it at this point is your, what's it called now? EAFC and your Call of Duty and Fortnite box. Because the Switch is being discounted from so many parts of that conversation. I think that's the only way you can really kind of coalesce it into what we mean by a console within this definition.
That's interesting. Well, that gives us something to talk about for our second story, which is that Arc Raiders is out now and has seen a large amount of success, but also a large amount of controversy. And this is part of the ongoing war of the AI wars that seem to be battling now. Various industry figures have weighed in on the AI debate this week because of Arc Raiders, and we're also going to mention Krafton within this as it pivots towards AI-first strategy. But to give the overview of what the story is here, Arc Raiders is out. Reviews were pretty positive, and then Eurogamer put out a review which was scored at 2 out of 5. because of Arc Raiders using AI voices. That was what tanked the review score, which led to a lot of outcry for and against AI, for and against the review process. It led to Tim Sweeney getting involved in defense of AI. He suggested that AI dialogue generation, which is something that Arc Raiders was using AI for, could totally transform gaming. And he got on his pedestal and said that negative AI opinions are political. So without wanting to wade too much into that,
he's not
it's
wrong.
something to talk about.
There's so much. There's like about 8 things that I want to pick up on there. I'll start with the Eurogamer review because I think that's what really flagged to me in the first place. And I think it's a very hard thing to do. I would argue if you fundamentally don't agree with AI being used in the creation of a game, I'm going to say at any level, but at any creative and visible level, then maybe you shouldn't review it and make that stand rather than trying to put a score on something that fundamentally is going to... I mean, obviously it's a great point for discussion and it's a great thing to have and putting the score on it has drawn attention to that. But I just think it does down what the people that aren't AI in the creation process have put so much work into creating. It's a difficult place on that one. I do understand what they were doing.
Well, I think it raises questions. There's so much talk now about the games industry in terms of the media, where the media is at, what the media landscape looks like. Because a review score has had this much of an effect, is that a sign that the games media isn't as dead as seemingly we fear? Do reviews still matter? Or are they much more prone, more than ever, to personal bias, opinion? Are there fewer checks and balances? Or is this just one notable lower score making everyone question something that hasn't really changed at all since the dawn of review?
It's been a discussion for a long time, the concept of reviews. I mean, that's why some people switched to like 5-point scores. Was it Polygon back in the day kind of stopped putting scores on things so you'd read the review and you'd understand where the opinion came from, because you are reading somebody's opinion. That's the idea that reviewing, there are elements that I guess could be subjective, but ultimately it is going to come down to one person's opinion, and that is the reviewers. And that's where, like, Famitsu in Japan has an interesting thing where their 40-point score is scored at 4 people giving a score out of 10. So, at some point you get an aggregate across opinions there, so at least you get something a bit closer to something that could be, singular. But yeah, I think when you go somewhere, you're going there because you trust the opinion of people there, and you're there to see how they came to that conclusion, and that should be what feeds into it. And ultimately the number is to an extent a reflection of that, and I think that's where the Eurogamer piece has obviously kind of become the the lightning rod for opinion here because of the score. I think if people had read the piece in its entire, I think if it was just the piece in its entirety without the score, then it would be a far more balanced kind of vibe that came out off the back of that. But as it sits, obviously people want to have the conversation, and they want to be part of that conversation. If they're driving it, then all the better. So, like I said at the start, I do understand what they've done, but it does put you in a very challenging position where the only complaint you had about it was the use of AI, because there are a lot of people that aren't AI involved in the creation of it that are probably feeling a bit hard done by off the back of it. And to come round to the AI part, it's been a long, like, you hear a lot of kind of elements of where voice acting comes in. And obviously voice acting is an art, and I don't know how. I would never want to see that art stopped. I would always want actors and voice actors part of that creation process, the human element behind it, all of that there. But also I understand that recording costs a fortune. You're like whole days in the studio. You have to bring people together if they're not massively professional, because obviously a lot of recording artists now do have things in their own house, but they still need to set like time aside. And if you've got a celebrity or someone in there, or even just a voice actor, calling them back for like a single line change or a pickup is probably very expensive to the studio. And if at some point in their contract at the beginning of that, there's some element where they're paid over and above what they would be otherwise, and I'm making things up now, I don't know if this is what happens, but were this to be the process, where they get paid a little more so that a percentage of their lines could be re-recorded using AI so they don't get called back, but they're still getting some element of money for it, but it doesn't slow down creation in what can be like a a different part of the process to what a lot of the team are doing, then it could be a win-win. As games get more expensive, having that flexibility is good for smaller studios where having to have that recording studio space is a large amount of budget. Also good, but I'm not behind the scenes on all of it to know exactly the ins and outs of that.
It's a lot of that behind the scenes that people are still figuring out, and this is something that Crafton seems to be taking a big step in becoming the precedent for, or at least what the playbook might be for how to or how not to do this. But the studio has signalled and announced it is moving to an AI first model, and this has meant that this week they announced a severance package. They were putting together a program for their members of staff who would be losing their jobs in order for effectively AI roles to take over. So the company is very open about its position, which is a bold move because we've referenced already the industry figures feeling they need to step in and say things. There's been a lot of debate. There will be for a long, long time. But Crafton seems very happy to make a stand and say, this is our position, in a way I don't think some of the other large games companies are ready to do just yet. So this is a very interesting thing to keep an eye on, something we keep referring to here on the show, keeping an eye on things. But this is what we mean. The news, it cycles, things are evolving. So it will remains to be seen this time next year what Crafton looks like.
I'll be fascinated. I mean, you know, we have worked with a number of titles that have elements of AI in them, and we've seen how difficult that can be to get people to pay attention to them. And like, if a company's going to go fully down that path, like, it's going to be interesting to see if that normalizes it or if they're going to see a blowback on their side of that, and they're just not getting the attention to get their games noticed. But like I say, maybe it's going to become normalized. Maybe they find paths or people that are just view AI more favorably and it gets through that way. Yeah, like you say, time to wait and see.
Well, it's that communication that could be an issue, which is our third story here. Generally, some PR risks this week to report on. This story encompasses the Game Awards Future Class and some of the issues surrounding that, as well as the controversial Battlefield Veterans Day pack. And really, as we dig into what this story is, the nexus of what this is, of lessons to be learned from better communicating these things, because they are some, not dangerous, but difficult topics, and you question how the companies involved could have communicated these better, and the kind of role of the media reporting on these, and how it is perceived among audiences finding out for the first time about it. Because this was a great use case, I think. I was putting together the show notes for this episode, and when I put in the bit about the Veterans Day pack, the story here is that EA were selling a cosmetic pack for Battlefield as part of Veterans Day, and on the face of it, you see Veterans Day pack, partnering with the National Ranger Association. The perception is, oh, if I buy this pack, the money is going to that charity. That's why I would buy this pack. And actually, the proceeds were not directly donated to charity. And then, Alex, you wrote in the show notes, I'm going to ask if they could do this. It's a wild thing to do.
It is bold. I know, bold. Like Warner Brothers, but well, that might not be the right term. It is a strange thing to do because it was Warner Brothers that put, it was the Shadow of War. Somebody on the team passed during its creation. They put out a skin about it, and they weren't giving that money back to people until there was backlash. I think it was members of the family. I'd have to go back and double check the full story on that. But it was something along those lines. And the idea of using anything that, is deeply personal to people and not, and then keeping the proceeds just feels wildly inappropriate. And like I say, if it's part of Veterans Day, I don't know if that's the Veterans Association and things like that. They're a whole group, aren't they? I mean, you can't just co-opt that without it being clear.
So what EA did here was they made an undisclosed private donation to the National Ranger Association that they claimed to have made the pack in collaboration with. Again, that wasn't made very clear to the players, and therefore when it was reported on, some of the details get lost. And so EA is dealing with the situation of EA tricking players into donating to charity on Veterans Day in America, one of the most poignant and just a day you do not want to be messing about with. and EA seems to be doing that. And it's extra interesting because Call of Duty, Battlefield's main rival here, has long donated full proceeds on such initiatives and packs to charity. So Battlefield and Call of Duty will forever be intertwined and compared. So it's very interesting that even on charity initiatives, there seems to be a winner and a loser in terms of which game is better at doing it. So it's a very basic PR risk, and it's very just eternally surprising this can still happen for such huge companies to be making these mistakes. Yeah, the long and short of it is they need to be better at communicating, navigating these grey areas, and not diminishing charity and jumping on important causes for bandwagons, which is where we come on to the Game Awards.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's always a risk whenever you do something that's deeply emotional to people or kind of tied to some people's sense of identity as well. And to do anything with that is just a risk unless it's all going directly to helping that cause. But yes, the Game Awards. Sorry, Jack.
Well, no, this is why these stories are intertwined and bundled together today for this episode. The Game Awards, they've had a busy week for the Game Awards. It was announced that Amazon has paid for the event to be streamed on Amazon Prime Video. And there will be a limited time merch store, because who doesn't want branded Game Awards merch? Do you think you can get a Jeff Keighley face mask?
And just everybody in the crowd staring back at him like something out of being John Malkovich. I'd be down for that. Yeah, why not?
On a serious note, they had that bit, which caused some issues about the ethical nature of that as an awards event being underwritten now by Amazon.
So sure, I don't know what the deal is with the Oscars, but whoever gets the rights to that, I'm sure, is paying a small fortune for the privilege. I think if your issue is where it's being streamed, not that there should be an issue, but I think I'm not sure. I think that's a huge problem.
The main problem for the Game Awards this week has been the talk around the Game Awards Future Class. It was an initiative set up a little while ago to give opportunities to lesser represented groups in the games industry, but those people have been speaking up this week because the future class has been abandoned. The members say they felt neglected and used as props, while the Game Awards seem to profit, if not in money yet, at least in goodwill, off the back of it, which is again why we're talking about basic PR risks and things of need to communicate these causes better, because Jeff Keighley and the Game Awards have a kind of a brand built, and this is chipping away at that. One of the interesting parts of this story was one of the members of this future class had said that group met up at a Starbucks next to the show while it was happening. They weren't given any actual treatment, while F and everyone else were having a party in the event and networking and everything in the way that the future class seemingly weren't allowed into. So there's a lot of talk here about doing these things better if you're going to set up these initiatives, communicating it properly, and just generally not being scummy in a way. We work in PR. It's the entire image building.
I'd be interested to know what help they did receive and what that whole process looked like. But I can equally, yes. If you're being used to say look how helpful we're being to smaller studios, to indies, to raise their profile. Arguably, they got the raised profile. As an endorsement on that level, it could have helped them. I mean, we know in the industry at the moment it can be very hard to lock down, to get attention, to lock down funding, elements like that. And if it gave them the bump there, maybe there were benefits that are really hard, intangible in the moment. You don't necessarily know that it's the impact it's having. But yeah, if you're looking for support or you have expectations of what the future class benefits were meant to be and they weren't there because the infrastructure wasn't set up or they were doing it for the first time, and you seeing your initiative set up, maybe if they run another future class, they'll have learnt their lessons for the next one. It could be something as simple as that. But yes, you'd hope with how successful the Game Awards are and with how ingrained in the industry the people involved with it are, that they'd have had a clearer understanding of what the infrastructure should be to make that work. Yeah, but it's a rough time in the industry. I think generally, it may be part of where the issues were coming were equally from that.
Well, on a more positive note, it is time for the rapid rundown, and we do have a positive story in here today.
Oh, hey.
Which is that Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 has reached 4 million sales. I am incredibly biased because I love this game. The final DLC launched this week, a lot of references to the first game. The game is a contender for Game of the Year. Not that that's just one singular award, there are lots of different Game of the Year awards. Either way, it's in the conversation. And for me, I just think it shows that if you have a high quality, single player focused game, it can yield a lot of returns in a landscape that is increasingly saturated with quick turnaround games, free to play, live service. It's just a good game. There's passion behind it, and I really, really want it to get the flowers that it deserves.
I don't know enough about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I will say that I'm absolutely on board with... I mean, frankly, I don't have time to play massive live service games now, and if I jump into a single player and I can chip away at that, then that's fine. Whereas, like, a lot of live service stuff, if you're logging off and you can't log back in and chip away because everybody's just like straight past you. So, you know, you kind of sit in this place. It's like, it's horses for courses, but it's great to see that with all the kind of ideas that they're not the games that can kind of be endlessly successful in the way live services can, they're still getting their props and their money for the work they put into making it.
It's also another win, shall we say, for the European games industry. The team based out of Prague being in the same conversation for Game of the Year in the way that Expedition 33 is also being based out of France. That game has been snubbed for the Grammys. It is not up for a Grammy Award, despite all the success that has had and its 10-week reign on the Billboard classical charts. It was up for a Grammy Award as part of the Grammys gaming section. So in a way, you could say, you know, the Grammys don't know enough about games, therefore they're only going to pick something they've heard of in the same way that you might expect some more consumer elements or consumer media. If they were going to hand out, this is the Game of the Year, and they've never covered games before, they're going to pick something like Call of Duty because it's a safe, known brand. But the composer had said that... No, sorry, it was the Sword of Sea composer thanked for being nominated, but he said Expedition 33 should have been up there. So very interesting that even figures in the industry would like that game to get the flowers that it deserves as well. And again, just interesting when non-game-centric awards deal with games, seeing what those games are and how people react to it.
Yeah, I think it's been a long-held issue with a lot of stuff. Non-gaming awards always get a bit kind of watered down. I don't honestly know the other games completely on the list to sit here and be like, to understand the thinking behind them. But like you say, if they're not some of the big ones, I mean, obviously Claire was in kind of the front of people's minds for absolutely ages within the world of gaming. Same with Silk Song and like other games, but outside of our corner, like how big are they really? Like I could probably bring up Call of Duty with my mum and her know what I'm talking about, but Claire Obscura's
an interesting one. I'm going to read out very quickly the awards.
Sorry, I derailed.
I'll ask you to guess, just because we
Good, because that would we'd be here all day.
So we have Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora, Secrets of the Spires,
Right.
Helldivers 2,
Okay.
Indiana Jones and the Great Circle,
Okay.
Star Wars Outlaws Wild Card and a Pirate's Fortune, and Sword of the Sea. And that is the best score soundtrack for video games and other interactive media. It's very, very vague. And again, even if it's not so much the game is of great quality, the soundtrack for Claire Obscura was seemingly good enough to have a 10-week dominant Goldberg-esque streak over the classical music charts, which is not related just to games. That includes films and everything else. If it was big enough to be holding a title of reign over that, then I think it's definitely something to at least talk about and have a conversation.
You could have honestly tied me to this chair and like held me here indefinitely, and I don't think I could have ever got to the full name of that Avatar game. It would never happen. Like just to go on like games that are on that list, you could have held me here all year.
Would have slowed down the rapid rundown a lot.
It would have ruined it. But like, I guess I knew that. I did. I knew there was an Avatar game. I did, but I don't. No, I have no memory of that at all as a full title.
Well, our last story here on the rapid rundown is a much shorter title, League of Legends 2. The rumours are stronger than ever. Reportedly built on a new engine to remove all the legacy code, to future-proof the game. They're keen, seemingly, to retain the signature gameplay of the original. But then that leads to a lot of questions here. We've got over 15 years of player-owned cosmetic content people have been collecting. What happens with that? There's over 170 characters. Are all of them going to make it? Probably not. Overwatch 2 was one of the immediate things I thought of here, and I think you echoed that as well, because that really was an interesting one to get a sequel. It felt very soon. I mean, the fact that we're talking about League of Legends 2 after all these years of just LoL being itself doesn't need a sequel. Yeah, a lot to consider here. Huge risks.
I mean, the reason I thought Overwatch sprang to mind was because there you did keep, like, everything you had in the original game was retained when you move into the new one, and essentially it was an update with a title bump and kind of a transition over. No, but I mean, technically you had everything you'd ever paid for, you had everything you ever unlocked, technically was there, and essentially it was an upgrade, although, like, graphically it wasn't huge, and the issues with Overwatch was not what you left behind. The other thing that sprang to mind for me is I have also worked in-house on games that have been long-running live service games with lots of unlocks, and you put all this effort into making that transition over, and you leave a lot of people behind, and, like, you end up kind of splitting your development cost between the two because you need to keep the one that still has people in it while they move over. So I guess the hope is in this, what they're doing is they're building a new engine, they're building something that's smooth, they're building something that looks better because they're, future-proofing it as an esport. So, you've still got something that looks flashy, whiz-bang. Where did that come from? And fancy like that. But they're going to retain everything. So if it's a change in name only as they move everything over onto the new engine, then the only actual problem there becomes people who are playing on an older PC and are left behind in the move if the performance level is higher. Hopefully that's what they do. I mean, because that's where I can see there being some kind of need for it. But like you say, it's a dice to roll if you're doing anything other than that there, because the sunk cost fallacy is a real thing, and it's going to be hard to pull people over into a new experience. I think if they are doing it, it's keep everything, literally kill League of Legends so people have to move over, but promise exactly the same experience in whatever this new game, engine, whatever it may be. That would be the easiest way for them to manage it and make sure it's a success day one, I guess.
Well, I'm going to say the trademark thing now of one to keep an eye on, because who knows what the timeline on that looks like. What we can tell you is the timeline of this show is reaching its end. We have wrapped up our weekly wrap-up of all the news with it's kind of a bigger episode than normal, perhaps because we've rolled a few stories into one. But there's been a lot to talk about, so hopefully we have summed everything up so you don't have to now have 10 tabs open trying to figure out what all these stories mean, because we've done that for you mentally with our 20 tabs or so.
But also links in the description.
As always, we're going to be linking it in the description. If this is your first time listening, welcome to the show. If not, thanks for sticking around. You can find this episode and the others on YouTube and your favourite podcast platform of choice. Shout out to Buzzsprout for keeping track of all of that for us. Thank you, producer Megan, behind the scenes, keeping today's show ticking along. Thank you, Alex, for joining me. Any final words? No.
Thank you very much for having me. Always fun to come and give some opinions and then panic that I've said the right thing for the rest of the week.
Well, you can stat pad our engagement by listening to it back to find out what you said.
No.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, and we will see you on the next show. Thanks for listening.
So, yeah.